Like I was saying before, it's beyond trends. I think trends is one thing, right? They imply it's a fading thing, right? But actually, it's really important to recognize that WGSN is really good at understanding societal shifts, cultural movements that are shaping an industry, a consumer group, right? So it's really important, therefore, that brands and agencies with WGSN or with any other, like really, literally company or advisors they use, that they really are good at spotting those cultural movements that are really in sync with their audiences and their customer groups, right? One thing is to identify them. And of course, platforms like WGSN are good at that. But then brands need to connect their narratives to these cultural movements, these trends, right? And there you need to be very clear again what you stand for as a brand, where do you have permission to play, or what are the conversations your best place to say something, right? To join the conversations, and where really it's not your place to be and to be part of it. And then that's how you become, I'd say, culturally relevant. And that's when you as a brand, right, or your brands, if you're an agency, that's when they show up in social feeds. When people and humans think about their lives, they don't think about products, right? They just think about whatever. And that's when brands, when they become culturally relevant, where they connect with those cultural narratives, that's when they show up in social feeds, right? And become known and become relevant to people. But I think beyond that, beyond popularity and being known, I think brands should aspire to have an impact and meaningful impact on those audiences and customer groups and communities they aspire to connect with. So it's about really playing a role in the in that cultural movement. For example, right, if I think about an example of this that comes to my mind, there's a home retailer in the UAE. And they just sell furniture, essentially. I think last year or a couple of years ago, they launched this campaign that's called the Homecoming campaign, that aimed essentially at change social attitudes towards children adoption, in the region, in Saudi, in countries surrounding countries. And that campaign, of course, that had an impact, massive impact on those societies, on those parents that maybe felt the stigma, right, to adopt children, but at the same time it connected so much what they stand for and what eventually they sell, the product, right, home, the idea of home. So it's just a good example of that. When it comes to
interesting
agencies and brands, how do you operationalize insights that you get from WARC, for example, or WGSN, right? I'd say I've seen companies do that well when they create systems, knowledge transfer systems in the companies, where they're able to create moments throughout their calendar where they share insights coming from WARC or coming from the festival, right? When they essentially create a calendar around WGSN when they launch their new future scenarios trends, or Cannes Lions future creative trends, etc. When they really embed those moments into their calendars, and then they create a system internally to transfer this knowledge. Could be like creating regular moments with the teams, or online repository where those insights, reports, presentations are saved. But also, they are really good at, these companies and agencies are really good at creating a culture of continuous learning, which is what you get when you get access to platforms like WARC, Contagious, WGSN, etc. So it's really operationalizing it and having people in charge of doing that, like people like accountable of, really being the contact person with our organizations, and then make sure that there's a system, a calendar in place for transferring all that knowledge back to the business.
Consumer trends, in the way that we're talking about it right now, typically it's just based on things that evolve organically, right? But I can't help but ask, like, in the case where a brand or sort of leads, the change. I like to use an example from the Nigerian market where I am based. is that there was a a niche culture that we refer to as alternative culture, which had the archetypes of certain adult males. They show up in a Versace shirt with button down. They've got full beards. They've got about 3/4 pants on, boots on, and all this kind of. So there's this sort of, and at the time they were really, really sort of like a niche culture. But today, some of those nuance of this niche culture at the time is now fully mainstream. And a brand like Jameson more or less sort of spotted this consumer change, identified with that niche culture, and led that change. And what happened afterwards was 3 or 4 consecutive years of triple digit growth rates for the brand in the market, in volume and in value. So I'm just curious to asking, I think my question is, when you look at brands generally, what separates brands like Jameson, who lead consumer change and trends in the way that I've just described, versus brand who eventually see this, in the example I was given, this sort of alternative culture now becoming mainstream, now want to jump on it. Like, what separates those brands? Did you get my question yet?
Totally, absolutely. I'd say, in my view, a couple of things. Number one, those brands are really clear on who they're speaking to, who their audience is. It's not everybody. And they're not scared of looking at niches, untapped consumer needs or cultural niches that might be small to start with, but could become mainstream, right? So they're really clear who they're speaking with. They're really specific, right? They understand their community. I'd like to talk about community rather than audience, I'd say. And they're fully embedded into it. They're part of it rather than being outside of it, looking in a way. So they're really customer-centric, community-centric, and they're not scared of niches, right? They want to be specific, right? But to be specific, you really need to be to have a full understanding of the culture in that niche, in that community. You need to spend time with them. The other thing I'd say is that you need to have a really clear view of what you stand for as a brand. I know it's an obvious thing to say, but it's not so obvious to do it.
Yeah.
My firm belief is that the most powerful brands and businesses have a really clear brand point of view and brand strategy, and that influences the business strategy. It's not the other way around. Yes, of course, you've got a lot of businesses that don't have a brand strategy and they have their brand strategy being influenced by the business strategy. But I do believe that it's a lot more powerful to be clear as a business as to what your brand's role is in the world, and then make all the business decisions from, product decisions, structural decisions, who you hire, how, and all of that being influenced by the brand point of view. That's how you, again, mean something to somebody, even if it's a small niche in the first place. And then those businesses, I believe, have got really, they are able to nurture a culture of psychological safety in those teams, in those organizations.
Right.
If you really want to innovate, which is what the Nigerian business you were talking about, has been doing, then you need to be able to allow your teams to fail and to admit, look, I've made a mistake. I tried. This is what I've learned. I'll do it differently next time. But to be able to do that, again, not an obvious thing to do. It's easier said than done. You need to have psychological safety, right? An environment where employees feel safe to take personal risks, interpersonal risks, essentially, without fearing for the consequences,
Right.
essentially. And the other thing, maybe finally, is that those businesses sometimes are not afraid to disrupt themselves. So it literally thinking, what could kill my brand today? What could kill my business today, right? If somebody came like starting from zero, could they kill my business? And if yes, what do I need to do to disrupt myself to avoid from that hole, essentially?
at work you had access to global data, if I put it that way, I mean a sizable amount of data on what works and what doesn't in advertising. you know I want to ask you, what in your opinion are the top three, I do say opinion but backed by that data that you're aware of, what are the top three insights every brand or agency should adopt from that body of knowledge, from your experience and your knowledge of this global data, in terms of what works and what doesn't work in advertising? What are your top three insights that you believe every brand and agency should adopt from that body of knowledge?
Yeah. Thank God I still access WARC, because it's still part of the Lions portfolio. I honestly, if I didn't have access to it, I would buy it. This is literally what I think as a marketer.
Right.
I'd say when it comes to really what works, really work marketing that really has an impact and is effective, creativity is number one, obviously. There's so much evidence, right? Years of evidence, right? There's a body of knowledge around the fact that really creativity is a competitive advantage for marketers. The quality of your creative, right, can improve our ROI by a factor of 12, right?
By a factor of what? 12?
12. It's massive, right? There's a lot of research around it. Creativity is number one. Totally in control of an advertiser, right, a brand, a marketing team, 100%. Media choice is also important, right? If you think about the role that media, the media mix really plays in marketing effectiveness. For example, TV, right, still is a media channel because of the attention, the visual attention, right, that it implies, right, really is a very effective channel. And then brand equity, right, is really important to drive effectiveness. The fact that you have invested in a brand consistently over the years, the fact that your brand has fame, your audience is already clear as to what you stand for, that improves the effectiveness of any campaign that you do. The WARC also talks about creative commitment. It is a really important one. Essentially, the three elements, like I was saying, definitely creative, the quality of it, but also the size of the budget is important for effectiveness.
Interesting. The size of the budget is important for effectiveness. I think we need to underline that. I put it in bold caps. I mean, whatever,
And yet, if you look at, there's a recent report that WARC has launched just last month, that basically talks about the 5 ways CMOs can influence the C-suite. In there's a chart that shows how actually, despite knowing all of that, actually investment in marketing has been decreasing in the last few years as a percentage of a business's revenue, right?
Interesting.
So we know it, but still, marketers really find it really hard, right? We all find it hard to get more investment, right? So let's go back to creative commitment, creative, right? The size of the investment, but also the amount of media channels. Going back to the media mix, right, is really important. And the length.
You mentioned brand equity.
Brand equity and the length of the commitment, i.e., for how long your campaign is in market.
Right.
There's a correlation between that and effectiveness.
Kind of taking that a step further, do you think that creativity, and you've spoken about that, the importance of that, just now, but do you think that creativity and sort of like commercial performance, do you think that the relationship between these two is really where it needs to be? Sometimes it feels like there is a it's like in the boardroom or in these management meetings, it's like us versus them. We are the guys who are pushing for creativity. These guys are the ones pushing for commercial performance. In some organizations, it's better. It's more sort of collaborative or integrated in a sense. What do you think, broadly speaking, with your view of a lot of markets and a lot of brands and agencies, do you think that that relationship or the conversation around that relationship is where it needs to be in terms of the relationship between creativity and commercial performance?
The relationship, there's a clear evidence, like I was saying before, between like the impact of creativity on commercial results and impact, right? There's so much evidence. For example, we do a study every year, Alliance, the state of creativity study that looks at the state of the creative industry, the trends, the challenges, the beliefs. And literally, we saw last year that brands are more likely to grow, are 6 times more likely, they grow more, are 6 times more likely to invest in creativity and have bigger budgets, right? So it's clear, right? The relationship is clear. But in the boardroom, the challenge is to prove it, right? To prove it with hard facts. Again, there are the facts, but, sometimes it's difficult to, have the holistic measurement framework in place to be able to directly correlate this activity with the, business results or business effect. Partially, the challenge is a language challenge, right? In the boardroom, there's a education that needs to happen, rather than education, I'd say an alignment between CMO, CEO, CFO, and the other C-suite stakeholders on what, how really does creativity have an impact on business and business results, and what are the different levels of business impacts. For example, in 2020, we launched, particularly WARC, Cannes Lions, with James Herman. We launched the Creative Effectiveness Ladder. It is an interesting framework, really designed to help marketers understand and improve the impact of creative marketing efforts. Essentially, it is a ladder that has 6 layers and 6 levels, and it identifies essentially 6 levels of effects, business effects, that a campaign can produce. From the bottom, which is called influential ideas, essentially is the least business effects. For example, a campaign, an idea that has created buzz, that has had a lot of shares on social media, right? Still good, but really not huge business impact. To the top of the ladder, which is the top level, is called enduring icon. At that level, those campaigns, those ideas, those projects, those programs create long-term brand and business effects like market share growth, revenue growth, profitability growth. And what the ladder does, apart from being a really tool and a framework for marketing teams to reflect on the work that they do and see what kinds of effects their marketing campaigns have had, what kinds of KPIs they are more important, right, connected to different levels. But it is also a really important tool in the C-suite to have a shared language around effectiveness. What do we mean by effectiveness? What kind of business effects do we expect to achieve if we do this, if we invest this versus that? And bringing examples of that, right? Because we've done it before, or we've explored at different levels of the ladder. So I think a lot of it is a measurement and a language challenge that can be solved with the right frameworks and with the right investment and commitment to measuring the right things.
What are some of the things that the jury or juries are rewarding today that they didn't 5 years ago? And I think on the backdrop of that is to kind of also, sort of reiterate what have you learned about, the DNA of campaigns that go ahead to win? What are those things that really stand out, with campaigns that go on to win at the festival? And like I said earlier, what are the things that juries are rewarding today that they weren't rewarding or they weren't focusing on maybe, let's say maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
Yeah. So first of all, there isn't really a DNA of a line winning, like a specific formula, right? There aren't any formula. And also we rely on the 500 jurors that join us every year to judge the 30 lions, right? The 30 categories that we have at Cannes Lions. Rely on them to define the benchmark for creative excellence every year. So it's really in their hands, their expertise. They're diverse teams coming from all over the world with different, really diverse background and areas of expertise. If I look at what they look at, what the jurors look at when they judge the work, there are certain characteristics, right? Number one, emotional engagement, no doubt about that. That winning work often really taps into the power of emotions to cut through, right? And to really have a strong connection with their communities, with communities, audiences, with humans at the end of the day. Connected to that, creative storytelling is really important, right? With ad blocking in mind, you just need relatable stories that cut through all of that, right? And really make people feel something through storytelling. Obvious thing to say, but still very important. Cultural relevance is also very important. Effective work often, winning work often resonates with cultural conversations and drive brand fame. That means that the jurors need to have the cultural context. Imagine that we have entries, thousands of entries from 90 different countries, right? And 500 jurors judge these. When agencies, when creatives, when marketers, when brands enter the work, we ask them, what's the cultural context of this idea, right? If it's an idea from Nigeria, for example, what's the cultural context that the jurors need to be aware of? Because it might not be there. They might not be from there, although they're from so many countries. Like we've got jurors from 80 countries. Still, you just need to have that cultural context. So cultural salience and relevance is really important. Strategic clarity, super important. A clearly defined strategy is essential for, of course, to have a powerful idea, a strategy that connects with the universal customer truth. And then consistency and brand equity, sustaining a consistent creative strategy over time, over the years, can really enhance, as we know, brand equity. Think about the obvious cases, right? Dove and Real Beauty, brand platform, there have been existing for many, many years. Or Snickers, you're not you when you're hungry. Another example of that. Data-driven insights. Often jurors look at the use of data to inform campaign decisions. And sometimes the use of data to adapt your campaign or your idea while it's already in market. We've seen lots of ideas and lots of examples of those. But really clever use of data to enhance creativity. I'd say these are the elements, characteristics that jurors look out for. There will be others, right, for sure. And there are things that change every year. If I think about how the awards, what's important right now that might not have been important, not important many, many years ago, but anyway, what we're seeing jurors award also a lot more is creative effectiveness, the impact of creativity. So it's not just about creativity, although there are some lions just focused on that.
Obviously. Get what you mean.
Many lions just focused on that. We've got a creative effectiveness lion, for example, that really awards work that has been previously awarded from a creative perspective and then can be entered into the creative effectiveness lion. And there really is all about awarding the business impact that it has had on a business, on a company, right? Effectiveness, given that it's so important in the industry, it will be important in the future, really important. We've seen the trend of humor and positive emotions soar in awarded campaigns, simply because creative work that has humor in it, it's just more memorable, it connects with people, it's distinctive, persuasive, and all that. Interesting. Low fee content, so that is sort of enabled particularly not just but also startups and smaller companies to really compete with giants, right? To really make sure that the idea was in front and center despite low production budgets. I'd say particularly relevant for lions like the social, all of the social media channels, lions. And then I'd say sustainability and D&I, obviously very important.
Got it.
when agencies enter the work, we ask them questions around their CO2 impact of emissions, right? Their environmental impact, right, of those companies they enter work for, or the brands they directly. And we also ask them questions around what's the progress of those companies, of those clients, of those brands in terms of like sustainability and D&I initiatives. So we are a lot more interested in all of that and the commitment of those agencies and those brands in these topics.